I think the best way to understand how to answer that question is to understand what Athens represents for Thucydides, which is to say the greatness that is Greekness. In other words, the precondition of Thucydides' own speech that's going to be universal is the universal city of Athens. And Athens is the universal city because it's the city in which mind reveals itself best. And this is to say that Athens is the source of what we might otherwise just simply say is philosophy. And no Athens means no philosophy, means no Thucydides, because understanding as such depends upon the city of Athens. And so what we see is that Thucydides is providing the highest possible praise for Athens, because what Athens provides or makes possible is human understanding as such. And contained in that claim is everything that we understand for this particular series as technology and nihilism. Because on the one hand, techne, or technology, is the way in which mind reveals itself. And on the other hand, regarding nihilism, or we should say in this case, man's relationship and understanding to the divine, for Thucydides, it seems to be wholly political, because as I've said, it depends entirely upon the coming into being of Athens from imperfect origins. That's the purpose of the archaeology, to point out the imperfect origins from which the greatness of Athens, which is to say the greatness of Greekness, is made possible. This is very different from Plato and Aristotle. And I'll go into this in my various discussions on, for instance, Plato's laws and Aristotle's politics. But suffice it to say here that for both Plato and Aristotle, the origin of philosophy is not political, not the city. And for Plato in particular, it seems to be the case that the origin of philosophy, at least in the laws, which is his longest dialogue, is the unknown God. And it is us, humans, who are the puppets of that unknown God. But all of that concerns the speeches. And notice that the precondition for the speeches is the deeds, namely the coming into being of Greekness that is the greatness of Athens. And so the deeds are prior to the speeches. And we can state this alternatively by saying that the political is prior to the philosophical. And what this means, at least according to Thucydides, is that in contrast to both the poets and the chroniclers, is that the speeches will not magnify or transcend the deeds. In other words, the telos, or the purpose of the speeches, is not for the sake of the beautiful or the pleasant. The deeds themselves are primary. Because again, and just to emphasize, the precondition for the speech is the deed. And so the deed always has to come first. And so returning to that very first thing that I had mentioned about Thucydides representing a fundamental alternative to both Plato and Aristotle, is that speech is always conditioned by the political order within which one finds oneself. And this is fundamentally different from what we find in Plato or Aristotle, because in Plato and Aristotle, what we get is that speech in its highest form, which is to say the philosophical life, permits access to what we would otherwise think of as the phenomenological whole, namely the world of man and the cosmos together, or more simply put, intelligibility as such. That is not what we have in Thucydides, because for the political, or the deed, to be prior to speech means that the primary task of man is first to overcome necessity. Now, there's an enormous amount more that can be said there, but that's what the purpose of reading the rest of the text is for.